Hello, welcome to Useful Idiots Midday Monday, where we go over the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so you don't have to. Also, we'll be
where we go over the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so you don't have to. Also, we'll be over the Sunday shows that we watch so you don't have to. Also, we'll be over the Sunday shows that we watch so you don't have to.
Okay, I got it. Also, sorry about that. Also, we will be doing a call-in after the show. So at 1:30, thanks for bearing, what's the expression? Bearing with us to come join us at this later time.
We appreciate your patience, everybody. We know it's a hard way to start the week without Monday morning in the morning, but hopefully you'll make do with midday.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And I'm a little made up because I just did some hosting at the Hill, so that's why I look kind of overly made up. I'm not going to pretend that this is how I woke up. Did not wake up this way.
Well, we have a jam-packed show.
Very jam-packed.
So much Sunday.
And let's tweet this out. Make sure the people know.
Oh, yes, that's right. Let's do that right now.
Spread the word, everyone.
Yes. And while we're tweeting, you guys can all give it a like to help more people see it and increase our self-esteem.
Yeah, increase our sense of validation.
Yeah.
Let's see, where am I with this? You have a good weekend, Aaron?
Yes, I think so. What did I do? Yeah, we saw our friend Ronnie Akalik, who you recently had on your show, right?
Yeah.
And what else happened? Yeah. And I sat in front of my laptop.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
right.
I tweeted it out. Everyone's liked the stream, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course.
So let's hit it. Should we get to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
And a good Sunday morning. No two men have challenged democracy and global stability more than Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And that was.
How does he know that? How can he just say that? That's such a bold statement.
Not Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. What about Hitler? Exactly. Or even George W. Bush.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Iraq War wasn't that long ago. It was 20 years ago, but it's still having massive impacts on global stability. But it's just because these are the two convenient boogeymen, bad guys. You can just say that. You don't have to back it up. But anyway, he just says it with such confidence. It sounds like he really believes it.
It's really ridiculous.
Was on full display again this week. Here at home, Republicans in the House made it clear that their answer to the violent coup attempt on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and the former president's months-long campaign to overturn the election results is to do nothing. Just 9 Republicans voted for a bill to prevent future presidents from trying to overturn election results through Congress. None of those 9 House Republicans that voted for this bill are returning to Congress next year, either because they lost primaries or they chose to retire. 203 House Republicans voted against this bill. There's a Senate bill that's very similar that has more bipartisan support, 11 Republican co-sponsors, than actual votes in the House. But now that bill may not get a vote until after the midterm elections. And election denialism is no longer an anomaly. According to one analysis this week, 201 of the 552 Republican nominees running for House, Senate, Governor, Secretary of State, and Attorney General, 36% of those nominees fully deny the legitimacy of the 2020 election. This doesn't count people that say Joe Biden is the president and won't talk about it. This includes just those that fully deny.
Okay, again, you can probably guess what I'm going to say about all this, but this is the problem to me of being a partisan hack, is you're only allowed to talk about the, whatever you want to call it, the election denialism of one party. So is there going to be a vote against having former presidential candidates call the winner a Russian agent or an agent of a foreign government and to pay people to invent claims along those lines, or to say that the election was stolen by Russia? I mean, no, there's none of that. That is somehow election denialism that is deemed valid. But Trump's election denialism is not. And I mean, this will totally appeal to anybody who's already inside the camp that knows that January 6th was crazy, that all of Trump's comments were nuts. everyone, everyone who's in that camp will know that. But anyone who's not in that camp, or at least anyone who thinks it was wrong for Democrats to try to undo the 2016 election by calling the president a Russian agent, they're simply just ignored. And they don't really matter to this, partisan hackery.
Right. That's the name of the game for Chuck Todd. Partisan hackery.
Yeah. But it goes on. There's more.
It's a big number. Globally, the existential threat to democracy is Vladimir Putin, whose decision to invade Ukraine has produced the biggest conflict in Europe since the Second World War. Putin is now threatening to use Russia's nuclear weapons, saying in a televised address, this is not a bluff. President Biden responded at the United Nations.
This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple, and Ukraine's right to exist as a people. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you believe, that should make your blood run cold.
My blood is not running cold. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I think part of the reason is that, well, first of all, this idea that Putin is trying to extinguish Ukraine as a state. I mean, we've talked about this. The New York Times recently reported that the Biden administration is baffled at how actually Putin has not escalated the war. They can't believe that actually Putin has not escalated the war in ways that they would have. For example, when they go into Iraq, they destroy all the civilian infrastructure. Russia hasn't done that, at least not yet.
Not yet.
But they're flirting with the possibility that he will by keeping this war going. And also, on this issue of Putin issuing a nuclear threat, I think his comments were dangerous and reckless. I don't think you should be threatening any kind of nuclear weapons use at all. But this idea that he was threatening to launch nuclear war is misleading. What he actually was doing was just reiterating Russian doctrine, which is pretty similar to U.S. doctrine, which is that if Russia faces an existential threat to its borders, then it will use nuclear weapons, which is very, very similar to Biden's own doctrine too. So this idea that he was outright threatening nuclear war is it's misleading.
Right.
I mean, not that he should have. I still think he shouldn't have said it, but they're not characterizing it properly.
Correctly, yeah.
Okay, well, thankfully the Chuckster is not done. He brought on Jake Sullivan,
our fave,
the national security advisor, and
start with this.
Yeah.
All right, let me start with this. We have Russia doing these sham referendums, trying to annex territory from Ukraine. We've got the civilian draft that Putin instituted to mobilize an additional 300,000 troops. So based on those two developments, what is the U.S. assessment right now of why Putin is making these moves? And is it a sign that he's losing this war?
Well, Chuck, throwing together sham referenda on 3 days' notice and scrambling to call up hundreds of thousands of people who are going to need to get trained and organized is not a sign of strength. It's not a sign of confidence. Quite the opposite. It's a sign that he is struggling very badly in Ukraine, that the Russian army is struggling badly, and that he doesn't have a lot of options left because he really did not want to have to move to mobilization. He knew that as soon as he ordered mobilization, there would be some upheaval in the country, and we're seeing the images and scenes of that right now. So the Russian army is in trouble, and the Ukrainian army is making gains on the battlefield and stopping the Russians from making progress in areas where they continue to try to advance. But that doesn't mean that the danger is over. It is very much real and still with us because Vladimir Putin remains intent, as you just heard from President Biden, on wiping out the Ukrainian people, that he does not believe that Ukraine should have a right to exist. So he's going to keep coming, and we have to keep coming with weapons.
Let me just say, what Jake is saying about Putin and it's not true. In all Putin's comments on this, he said that he does recognize that Ukraine has sovereign borders. Now, what he is now erasing are the borders in which a majority of Russian speakers live, the areas that have been under assault by the U.S.-backed government for the last 8 years. there was a peace process to end that conflict called the Minsk Accords. Ukraine and the U.S. refused to implement it. Now Putin, in a very dangerous and reckless way, is taking those territories by force. But the idea that he wants to erase all of Ukraine, especially those areas where people want nothing to do with Russia, is just not true. And this kind of rhetoric, it's well, anyway, like we'll see. We'll hear what Jake proposes doing.
Right to exist. So he's going to keep coming, and we have to keep coming with weapons, ammunition, intelligence, and all the support we can provide to the Ukrainians as they defend their land, their freedom, and their democracy.
So he says it there. We just have to keep coming with more weapons and more intelligence. So basically, keep the war going, even as now nuclear rhetoric is escalating. So
Right. That shouldn't have any effect on what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's proxy war time. That's just what it is. Well, yeah. And you know, so now also Jake Sullivan also addressed the question of nuclear weapons. And he said this on ABC's this week. He made the rounds of many shows this week. And this is what he said.
How serious was the nuclear threat that Putin made this week, and how will President Biden respond if he makes good on it?
We're taking it seriously. It's not the first time President Putin has made a nuclear threat in this conflict. He started way back in February when Russian tanks first rolled across the border, brandishing that nuclear card. And that has not deterred us from providing more than $15 billion in weapons to Ukraine, helping them be able to defend their country. And it will not deter us now. And we have communicated directly, privately, to the Russians at very high levels that there will be catastrophic consequences for Russia if they use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. We have been clear with them and emphatic with them that the United States will respond decisively alongside our allies and partners. And we have protected those communications, which we have done privately to the Russians, but they well understand what they would face if they went down that dark road.
So that means taking the fight directly to Russia.
We have communicated to the Russians what the consequences would be, but we've been careful in how we talk about this publicly because
it's always the news anchors who are more bellicose than the politicians. Right. So George Stephanopoulos, like, this means taking the fight right to Russia. He's so excited. Yeah. They love this. Like, they live for this. You know, like, I think being a cable news anchor is pretty boring. You've done this so many times. These interviews are just, it's the same thing every time. You're not really doing the job of an actual journalist by being challenging to these people because you're on their side. But you can, and we've talked about this before, Katie, like the one moment where they do sometimes challenge politicians is when they're not being hawkish and militaristic enough. So that's why George Stephanopoulos gets excited. So taking the fight right to Russia.
To Russia. Yeah, it's like, what about the no-fly zone?
Exactly.
When are you guys going to do the no-fly zone?
Yeah, exactly. And look, at least Jake Sullivan's saying something. I mean, even though he's threatening nuclear war with Russia, the fact that he's saying that they're communicating, that's a good thing, right? That is a good thing.
That is a good thing, yeah.
Because there was talk for a long time of there being no contact at all between these two leading nuclear powers. So the fact that there's some contact, even though it's over threatening nuclear war against the other, I still think it's a good thing because at least they're in touch.
So insane.
Because from our perspective, we want to lay down the principle that there would be catastrophic consequences, but not engage in a game of rhetorical tit for tat. So the Russians understand where we are. We understand where we are. We are planning for every contingency, and we will do what is necessary to deter Russia from taking this step. And if they do, we will respond decisively.
And look, an alternative to being in touch about nuclear threats to each other is being in touch about diplomacy, right?
Right. That's even better.
There's just no trace of that whatsoever. And that's why the easy thing for Jake Sullivan is that he's never even asked about it when he goes on these shows. Like, is there any plan for diplomacy at all? It doesn't even cross the minds of the people interviewing U.S. officials like Jake Sullivan. All they want to know is, have we threatened Russia enough?
Well, yeah, because you know what diplomacy is, Aaron? It's appeasement. It's appeasement.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a hot word right now.
Capitulation.
Yeah, capitulation. Can't talk to them.
It's Hitler.
Yeah.
Letting Hitler win.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Midlander, for giving us a like.
All right. Well, look, Jake's got other issues on his mind too, because not only is there, a potential nuclear war in Russia, but the U.S. is also trying to negotiate with Iran about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal, which, of course, Biden could have done on day one when he came back into office. But instead, he decided to keep a lot of the sanctions that Trump imposed on Iran, which has made re-entering the nuclear deal a lot more difficult. And those talks are still going on. And right now, Iran is facing internal protests after the death of a young woman in police custody after she was arrested by the so-called morality police for not covering her hair. And now Jake Sullivan is being asked to weigh in. And he was asked by Chuck Todd back on Meet the Press.
The Chuckster.
The Chuckster.
I want to ask you a question about the protests in Iran. You were in the Obama administration during the Green Revolution in 2009. You're well aware there were many folks who thought that the Obama administration then was a little slow to respond to those protests. Is the Biden administration's response a response to that criticism way back when? Is there going to be an attempt to be much more forward-leaning on these protests going forward?
What does forward-leaning mean? Like, what does Chuck want? It's the same thing we were just talking about. Like, does he mean lean into regime change?
Yeah, that's what he means. Lean into regime change. I mean, they did, I think, unless it's a callback to like MSNBC's motto, remember they did like lean in, lean forward.
Yeah, lean forward.
Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, lean forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what is Chuck talking about? It's very vague. Like forward. Like, what do you say? What you mean by that?
Yeah. What does he mean?
Yeah. And what he's referencing is back in 2009, there was this Green Revolution where, in response to alleged fraud in the presidential elections, there was these massive protests in the streets, and Obama didn't weigh in really forcefully on that for I don't know, a week or two, and he was heavily criticized. And Obama said in response, like, it won't help the protesters if I'm sort of cheering them on, because it will look like U.S. interference, which I thought was actually a fair position. Now, of course, I think secretly behind the scenes, I'm sure the U.S. was doing something anyway to, fuel the fire. But regardless, Obama was criticized for basically not trying to capitalize on the moment for regime change. And I wonder if Biden is taking away a different lesson. That's certainly what Chuck Todd wants him to do, it looks like.
Right. Really lean into that.
Yeah.
Well, Chuck, part of the reason that there was a different kind of approach in 2009 was the belief that somehow if America spoke out, it would undermine the protesters, not aid them. I think what we learned in the aftermath of that is that you can overthink these things, that the most important thing for the United States to do is to be firm and clear and principled in response to citizens of any country demanding their rights and dignity. And so,
except for Palestinians, where if they go out and nonviolently protest against a multi-decade occupation and get gunned down, as was what happened in Gaza with the Great March of Return a few years ago, the U.S. is not just silent, but it's actually supportive of Israel. And
that's because they're all terrorists. Yeah. You didn't know that.
Yeah.
They're all terrorists, and Israel is a democracy in a sea of barbarity.
Yeah, and pretty much, and any other place where the U.S. has a client government, the U.S. will be just as silent. But of course, again, Jake Sullivan will never be called on that on a show like this. It just doesn't happen.
Right after these protests broke out, our administration began speaking out. And the president, in fact, went to the well of the United Nations and said that the United States stands with the citizens of Iran, the women of Iran, as they demand their rights and their dignity and a better future in Iran. We have taken tangible steps to sanction the morality police who caused this young woman's death. And we've taken steps to make it easier for the Iranian people to get access to the internet and to communicate with one another and with the world. And we will keep speaking out day in and day out, because this is a matter of fundamental justice, dignity, and rights, and the United States knows which side we are on.
Yeah, the world needs to continue to see these protests and see what they're doing.
Rousing words from Chuck. Yeah.
Just want to run out the streets and protest.
Since you mentioned sanctions, I think it's worth pointing out that, the U.S. has been imposing sanctions in one form or the other on Iran for decades, right? And these sanctions, as we talk about, all they do is strengthen the authoritarian aspects of governments like Iran.
Right.
Under dire conditions where people lack basic needs, when you have sanctions on a country that deprives people deliberately of those basic needs, as U.S. sanctions are designed, that strengthens the authoritarian governments like Iran, right? It actually helps. Same with Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The sanctions on Iraq decimated the people, strengthened his government. So if the U.S. was actually concerned about doing what it could to help Iranian protesters and help people fighting back against authoritarianism, the best thing it could do is undo its own authoritarianism, which is imposing sanctions on foreign populations. There's really nothing more authoritarian to me than saying that I'm going to deprive people and countries that aren't even my own of the basics that they need. That's what U.S. sanctions are. It's actually a very authoritarian concept, and we only think of authoritarianism in terms of governments that we don't like, but not in terms of our ability to impose deprivations on people who don't even get to vote for us. Like, no Iranian gets to vote for whether or not a U.S. leader has the right to deprive them of food and medicine, but the U.S. just assumes that right for itself. And I'm not saying, in this case, they're sanctioning the morality police, and I'm not.
Right, we're not pro-morality police, but the question is, what
yeah.
effect does it have?
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely not endorsing the morality police.
No.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. All right. Now, what do we got next? We got. Oh, this is good. If the election is a referendum on the president.
Yeah. So
how that's
more shock.
So Jen Psaki, we recently saw her as Joe Biden's press secretary. But the cool thing about working for a Democratic administration is if you want, you can just get a job hosting an MSNBC show with a way bigger salary. Same job, but just bigger salary. And, probably like better healthcare benefits too than the White House. So Jen Psaki's now working for MSNBC. So here she is weighing in, though, on her former boss and what Biden means for the midterms.
I'm not sure how this is either really effective or you're trying to get the voter to take two issues and tie them together. You're trying too hard. I don't know, but an interesting response.
Yeah, I think that Democrats, if the election is about who is the most extreme, as we saw, Kevin McCarthy touch on there with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'll say her name, sitting over his left side, then they're going to win. If it is a referendum on the president, they will lose, and they know that. They also know that crime.
Wait, did we just hear Jen Psaki say that if the midterms are a referendum on the president, Democrats will lose? Let's hear it again.
Then they're going to win. If it is a referendum on the president, they will lose, and they know that. They also know.
Cannot believe it. What a backstabber.
That's crazy. Yeah, so I guess it's, not quite the same job if you're allowed to throw your
there's a minor difference.
President under the bus, but yeah, man, that's cold.
Yeah. I can't believe she did Joe like that.
Yeah. Especially since, right now, Joe's had some wins. He's had some victories recently.
I know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird timing.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess she's not as confident in President Biden as her job required her to be. That's quite the admission.
This is the Jen Unchained.
Jen Unchained.
And liberated.
Yeah. Should we hear the end of this clip?
Yeah.
That crime is a huge vulnerability for Democrats. I would say one of the biggest vulnerabilities. And if you look at Pennsylvania, for example, what's been interesting to me is it's always you follow the money and where are people spending money. And in Pennsylvania, the Republicans have been spending millions of dollars on the air on crime ads against Fetterman because that's where they see his vulnerability. So yes, the economy is hanging over everything, but you do have to look at state by state factors, and crime is a huge issue in the Pennsylvania race.
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting. I mean, look, I guess she deserves some credit for not just being a pure partisan hack like Chuck. She's showing a little bit of impartial analysis by saying that Biden would guarantee a Democratic loss if it's a referendum about him in the midterm. So, hey.
Yeah. That's crazy. I wonder if the Republicans are going to hire her. I wonder if they're going to make campaign ads off of that.
No, I'm sure they will.
Joe Biden's former press secretary.
Oh, yeah, that's coming for sure. That's definitely coming. Yeah. Probably even campaign ads off of your comment that it's going to be a campaign ad.
Right. Yeah, you're right. That would be meta.
Yeah.
Should we go to Face the Nation next?
Sure.
Is it time to face the nation? Is it time to face the nation?
It's time to face the nation. Yes.
President Biden has said more sanctions are coming.
Looks like Hillary.
I think that there's sanctions.
So for our podcast audience, Margaret Brennan speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. And check out Zelensky's jacket, Katie. What do you think of this jacket?
President Biden has said more sanctions are coming.
She sounds like she's, it sounds like she thinks that if she speaks loudly and slowly, he's going to understand English. There's obviously a translator there, but she does this thing also. She looks like Hillary because she sounds kind of like school marmish, and she's going like that with her hand. All right.
But look at his jacket.
Let's see his jacket. Yeah. I mean, what do we think? It's certainly not as cool as my jacket, which a lot of people are commenting on.
I'd love to see him in a jean jacket too, but I don't know. This jacket to me looks like he's going out clubbing or something like that, or he's cruising out. He's cruising around town. It's not really presidential.
Right. It isn't very presidential.
That's
a kind of Carhartt labor look to it also.
Yeah, but it's more fashion. It's more fashionable, I think, than
I'm giving it credit for. Yeah.
I think it's more designer.
Yeah. I want to know who made it.
It just, to me, it makes him look very young. Like,
that's true.
To me, he could be like 28 years old here.
I don't think he understands English that well. Someone said he doesn't understand English. I don't know how good his English is. Well, anyway.
All right. Well, let's hear what wise words he has to say for the world about Russia and the war.
I think that there's sanctions that must be implemented towards the very end completely. If we cut Russian banks from SWIFT, we need to cut all Russian banks from SWIFT. If we talk about embargo for energy, we need not to look for compromises, or we need to make sure that this embargo will be working and all the prices would be implemented according to the embargo.
You know what it is? I'm sorry to interrupt his talk about not compromising with Russia and imposing embargo. The collar is up on the jacket. The collar is up like this. And that to me makes it look like he's going out.
Yeah, I see what you mean, yeah.
That's what it is. The collar's up. Yeah. Okay. Back to
the collar.
Yeah. Back to World War III. Anyway.
Because the profits from these imports support the Russian army and fund the war. The United States could show its leadership position and recognize Russia as a sponsor of terrorism. I understand there will be implications. These implications will make diplomatic negotiations impossible. However, they are terrorists, and we cannot let them do it out of fear. They will not surrender. We need to keep applying pressure.
All right, let's just take in that statement, okay? It's pretty extraordinary, okay? He's saying we need to declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, as the Senate wants Biden to do. Biden's actually resisting this. And the reason Biden's resisting it, and this shows some tinge of reality in Biden's
other people
brain.
Are so bad that he almost looks good. Yeah,
it's because as Biden, as Zelensky says here, if you look at the caption, it will make if you declare Russia a sponsor of terrorism, it will make diplomatic negotiations impossible. In fact, let's hear him say it.
Diplomatic negotiations impossible. However,
so he's saying, yes, it will make diplomatic negotiations impossible. But
on the upside, but we can look at the glass half full.
It's just absolutely insane. So you're recognizing that this war is destroying your country, and there are even worse dangers to come. but yet you still want to take steps that will make diplomatic negotiations impossible. That is the Zelensky position, and this is who we're supposed to be taking advice from and orders from. It's pretty extraordinary.
Yes, no more diplomacy, but
okay, let's hit it.
They are terrorists, and we cannot let them do it out of fear. They will not surrender. We need to keep applying pressure.
Do you want to know another case of people saying that we don't negotiate with terrorists and that therefore we have to keep the war going? That was the Bush administration in Afghanistan when, in like the first few months of the war, the Taliban was basically defeated and they offered to surrender. And Bush and Rumsfeld said, we don't negotiate with terrorists. So they kept the war going. And guess what happened? The war kept going for another 20 years before the U.S. had to leave in humiliation. Now, the difference now is that the U.S. and Ukraine are fighting against a country with nuclear weapons. The Taliban didn't have nuclear weapons. But the same attitude is coming from Zelensky. We shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. Therefore, the war has to keep going. And I'm going out in my jacket.
yeah, and I'm gonna go out clubbing tonight. See you
They're
guys later.
terrorists. They don't have honor. They cannot keep their word. They do not kill military personnel. They rape, torture, and kill civilians. We found a big mass grave of 500,000 people. Today, I received more information. The journalists are on their way. They found 2 more mass graves, big graves with hundreds of people also. And we're talking about a little town of Izum. Do you know there are 2 more mass graves in a small town? This is what's going on. The sanctions need to continue. The sanctions will have political impact as well as financial impact.
I mean, so look, the problem with these atrocity allegations is we're not there to verify. But let's assume that Zelensky is right, that Russia caused these mass graves. Now, Russia said that these were Ukrainian soldiers who were killed. I mean, who knows? But let's say that Zelensky is right, that Russia committed atrocities and put civilians in mass graves. Do you want to take steps that will reduce the possibility of more atrocities or not? And he wants to take steps that ensure more atrocities and a lot more death for everybody.
Right. That's such an important point. That should be made by anyone who cares about, anyone who cares about Ukrainian civilians. But they don't. Because as we know from Lloyd Austin and many other people, this is about bleeding Russia.
Yes, exactly right. All right. We have more Zelensky if we want, or we can skip ahead. What do you think?
What's up to you?
Should we do one more Zelensky? Let's do one more
sure.
Zelensky. Yeah.
Can there be stability in Europe if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
No.
No?
I don't have anything to add. My opinion is no. We have observed this over the years. We don't see stability. Specifically, we see challenges and risks, political, economic, food crisis. Obviously, COVID-19 was not enough for them. COVID took so many lives, caused economic consequences. This is life. Unfortunately, it did take place. However, simultaneously, we see Russia creating artificially other kinds of crises, and they're very openly discussing the threats to the rest of the world. They started threatening us with nuclear weapons. Will the world depend on one country or one person? The world has to make a decision. We have made our decision. We will not depend on one person who is not a citizen of our country.
All right. So, I mean, what he's basically saying there is that Putin can't remain in power. So he's saying that there needs to be regime change inside of Russia, which is exactly what I think ultimately Washington wants as well. But the problem is to get to regime change in Russia, you're saying you want World War III because, as Putin said, his threat was that if our existence is threatened, that's when we would consider using nuclear weapons. And so that's what Zelensky is essentially advocating, whether he understands that or not. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nice tee up from Margaret, huh?
Of course.
Nice
Yeah, of
question.
course. That's her job. And you know what? Listen, let's actually hear one more clip of Zelensky because he also said something in this interview that was very revealing. He does understand the threat here when it comes to nuclear weapons, but he's still pursuing the policy of escalating the threat. So let's actually go back to clip 7.
Vladimir Putin continues to dangle the threat of nuclear weapons use. You've called this nuclear blackmail. Do you think he's bluffing right now?
Look, maybe yesterday it was bluff. Now it could be a reality. Let's look. What is a contemporary use of nuclear weapons or nuclear blackmail? He targeted and occupied our nuclear power plant in the city of Energodar. This nuclear station has 6 blocks. And on top of that, a few days ago, apart from this station, he blackmails, he continues his blackmail related to us exporting electricity to Europe. I have mentioned before, in Energodar, we have the size of 6 of Chernobyl nuclear plants. Several days ago, they started shooting at another nuclear power plant. It's called Pivdenna, or Southern Nuclear Power Plant. The missile hit the area that was 300 meters from the nuclear plant. The nuclear plant lost all the windows and doors, etc. So he wants to scare the whole world. These are the first steps of his nuclear blackmail. I don't think he's bluffing. I think the world is deterring it and containing this threat. We need to keep putting pressure on him and not allow him to continue.
So look, he says there, I don't think Putin is bluffing when it comes to nuclear weapons. So if that's the case, why would you want to continue fighting him if you don't think he's bluffing? You're basically saying, I'm willing to risk nuclear war. Now, what's interesting also about his answer is, so Zelensky makes some allegations against Russia of attacking nuclear sites. I haven't looked into the allegations that he's making about those specific sites, so I can't speak to them. What I do find interesting, though, is 2 things. One, he doesn't mention that the main nuclear site where there's been a lot of fighting and danger in Ukraine has been a plant called Zaporizhzhia, if I'm pronouncing it right. I might be getting it wrong. That's been the major flashpoint. That's the site that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, went and visited because there was so much dangerous shelling going on there. Now, who's occupying that plant? Russia. But still, we're supposed to believe that Russia, according to the Ukrainian narrative, is shelling a plant, a nuclear plant that its own forces are occupying. It doesn't make any sense. The far more plausible scenario is that it's Ukraine, as Russia has alleged, that's been shelling that plant. And Zelensky, for some reason, didn't mention that plant at all, even though it's the most dangerous nuclear flashpoint inside Ukraine. He also didn't mention this, and this doesn't get very much attention. But again, before the war, right before the war, before Russia invaded, this is still in the midst of an 8-year war that's been happening since 2014, but before Russia invaded in February of this year. Zelensky went to the Munich Security Conference and said that Ukraine will seek or wants to reacquire nuclear weapons, which is a very bellicose thing to say, especially at a time when Russia is massing troops on the border. And Russia has used that claim by Zelensky to help justify its invasion. So nobody should be making nuclear threats. Zelensky, he has every right to call out Russia for making nuclear threats, but he also has to own up to his own role in fueling that kind of talk.
The chair of the Senate Republican.
So this is, okay, now we're on to George Stephanopoulos. Okay, so now we're going on to George Stephanopoulos, and he interviewed Senator Barroso, John Barroso, John Barrasso, of Wyoming, and back on the issue of Iran.
Joined now by the chair of the Senate Republican Conference, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, John Barrasso. Senator, thank you for joining us again this morning. Let's pick up where we just left off with Jake. Did you find his argument convincing for staying in the Iran nuclear talks?
No deal with Iran, George, is a good deal. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. They continue to claim death to America. We cannot allow them to have a nuclear weapon. I've always felt this administration was too eager for a nuclear deal or any deal with Iran. And I think we should not go forward with one. If they do, it needs to come to the Senate for ratification. This administration wants to send tens of billions of dollars to Iran for a deal that I think is going to be a bad deal for America.
So this is a good clip that shows, why whenever there's unrest in a country that the U.S. wants to overthrow, it's important to remember who really cares about the interests of the people. So people rising up against an authoritarian government have every right to do so. I personally think that these policies of imposing forced covering on women is abhorrent, of course, but always people like this are going to use these moments to advance their regime change goals. And it's a similar thing where this senator says we can't negotiate with them. And, he makes a very interesting comment. He says that Iran chants death to America. Yeah. It's true. At some protests, like, for example, after the U.S. kills Iran's top general, Soleimani, who defeated al-Qaeda and ISIS and was accordingly seen as a hero inside of Iran, people chanted death to America after he was assassinated. That's true. Those chants happen. But so those are some chants at Iranian rallies. U.S. policy is death to Iranians via sanctions. These sanctions kill people by denying food and medicine, by denying parts for medical equipment that leave hospitals without the parts that they need to treat people. So yes, there are chants, death to America, but far more consequential and actually deadly are the U.S. policies that lead to death, that lead to the deaths of Iranians.
Yeah. Also, if that is the threshold for like sanctioning countries or regime changing countries, that they chant death to America at protests, we're going to have our hands are going to be full.
It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people to go after. Yeah. Okay. Well, luckily, Jake Tapper is here to weigh in on the Iran protests as well.
Her name was Mahsa Jina Amini. The 22-year-old Kurdish woman living in Iran was just visiting relatives in the capital last week when she was arrested by the Iranian so-called morality police, a unit tasked with enforcing strict social rules, including zealotry, such as the dress codes for women and forcing them to wear a hijab in public. She died while in custody. Iranian officials claim she suffered a heart attack, fell into a coma, and died. The U.S. says Amini was reportedly beaten before she died. This week, thousands of courageous Iranians across dozens of Iranian cities are rising up in protest. Take a look. Women cutting off their hair, women burning their headscarves, chanting messages such as women, life, freedom, and death to the dictator. The oppressive Iranian government has responded as you might expect, killing dozens of innocent civilians in the unrest. One woman reportedly killed on her way back from a doctor's appointment. Another, a 16-year-old bystander, child, allegedly shot by Revolutionary Guards. At least 1,200 Iranians have been arrested for standing up, voicing their protest against an abusive regime and demanding the human rights to which they are entitled.
Okay, look, if you're going to report on what's happening, no matter what your sympathies are, no matter how immoral you think the Iranian government is, you have to at least report the facts. And it's just true. And this doesn't take away from the legitimacy of the cause of challenging state repression. It's just true that state forces have been killed as well, that these protests are not all peaceful. It doesn't justify cracking down on them, but you have to at least acknowledge that it's happening. because when security forces are killed, there's going to be more violence. That's just how it goes. The same thing would happen in any country. And Jake is not disclosing that Iranian forces have been killed as well in violent attacks. There's
Right. No one ever brings that up.
There's videos of one officer being stabbed, to death. So look, again, you can oppose the Iranian government all you want and support the protesters, but you have to at least acknowledge the facts of what is happening.
Right.
This is a pivotal moment for Iran and for the world. The U.S. is imposing new sanctions against the so-called morality police, but leaders of the Western world need to go further and make it even louder and clearer that they stand with the women, with the people of Iran, and not with the twisted leadership of the Islamic Republic.
Not with the twisted leadership of the Islamic Republic.
You want to know what a friend said to me that, if actually Iran got rid of this rule, that she thought that still a majority of women would still cover, because there are some women who actually support this policy. It's not, but so it would even be in the Iranian government's interest to actually get rid of this. And I actually share that view. I don't understand how at this point you can impose that on
Right.
people, force them what to wear. But again, the broader point to me is it's not really my business. I live in Brooklyn, and stuff like this gives an opportunity to people like Jake Tapper, who don't care about the women of Iran, just like they don't care about the women of Saudi Arabia. They care about regime change. And
Right. If they cared about the women of Iran or Saudi Arabia, the thing is that sanctions, they wouldn't want to be sanctioning Iran because sanctions hurt ordinary people and disproportionately harm women.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's never acknowledged. So Jake can pretend to care about the people while still supporting policies that harm them and undermine the prospects they have to undo, the challenges that they face to fight the authoritarianism that they live under. That's what sanctions keep people subjugated.
Right. And they never work. No one can ever point to a time where they work.
Well, they work in the sense,
Right.
They don't work in the sense of the stated goal, but in the actual goal of making people suffer.
Miserable, yeah.
Because they live under the wrong government. They do work well there. But yeah, in terms of the stated goal of bringing freedom and democracy, no, of course not. Okay, well, on to more important issues like January 6th. Remember January 6th? It's all these shows would talk about for weeks and weeks. It's kind of faded recently with everything that's going on in the world. I guess that happens when you have the nuclear threats being exchanged. But
yeah, they take priority.
Yeah.
Even over things as important as January 6th.
Yeah.
Sure.
But one man who's still on it is Jamie Raskin.
With something that's getting a lot of buzz on social media. It's going to be on tonight's episode of 60 Minutes. Former member of Congress Denver Riggleman, who was an investigator, has made the following charge. Take a listen.
When you see that the White House switchboard had connected to a rioter's phone while it's happening. That's a pretty big aha moment. You get an aha
Wait a minute. Someone in the White House was calling one of the rioters while the riot was going on?
On January 6th, absolutely.
And you know who both ends of that call?
I only know one end of that call. I don't know the White House end.
It's an alarming finding. What can you confirm? What can you tell us about it?
Well, that's one of thousands of details that obviously the committee is aware of. And
thousands of details, Katie. Thousands of details. I can't wait for that long list.
I know. I think it's going to blow the roof off. What is it? What was he asked?
Yeah, Jamie Raskin promised that he was asked.
Yeah.
His revelations were going to blow the roof off the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he couldn't promise. He didn't want to overpromise.
No, he didn't. No, and he's not going to want to overpromise.
But he was asked that.
He was asked.
Chuck Todd wanted him to say, "Oh yeah, hell's yeah."
Yeah.
Our job is to put everything into a comprehensive portrait and narrative timeline of what took place. And to me, it's interesting, but much less interesting than the fact that Donald Trump told the crowd in public, you got to fight like hell, and if you don't, you're not going to have a country anymore. So, look, we're interested in telling the big story, which is this.
So we're interested in telling the big story. That's his way of saying that whatever this guy said and trying to sell his book, this big bombshell about the White House switchboard, is a nothing burger. It's very classic Russiagate. What I bet happened is that classic. Like what I bet is that someone from the protest called the White House switchboard, and then they got that in a call log. And so this guy, who we saw before, is a former January 6th staffer. He's trying to sell a book now, and so this is the kind of bombshell that he comes up with. And Jamie Raskin is basically saying that there's nothing to see there. But it got Chuck Todd obviously excited for a moment. But this is the classic.
And we get excited when Chuck Todd gets excited.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, let's finish this clip.
It was an organized, premeditated, deliberate hit against the vice president and the Congress to overthrow the 2020 presidential election. And I think the public understands the basic elements of the story. What we're going to do on Wednesday is fill in those details that have come to the attention of the committee over the last 5 or 6 weeks.
This apparently says a call came from inside the White House. I mean, how hard have you guys tried to track down who that person was? Do you have an idea of who it was?
I can't say anything specific about that particular call, but we are aware of it. And we're aware of lots of contacts between people in the White House and different people that were involved, obviously, in the coup attempt and the insurrection. And that's really what all of our hearings have been about. We've had more than 20 hours explaining that this was an organized, coordinated attempt to subvert the electoral process and to substitute the will of a minority for the will of the majority that was expressed, where Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by more than 7 million votes in 306 to 232 in the Electoral College.
Is there anybody who's on his staff or in Congress or like a producer at Meet the Press? Is anyone going to say God, I'm tired of talking about this? It's all we've talked about for more than a year.
Someone should protest. Someone should go on hunger strike.
I mean, come on. I know for some people it's important, and I don't want to belittle what happened on January 6th. It was a horrible riot. It should never have happened. But again, I mean, I don't think it was a violent coup. Violent coups aren't usually led by QAnon shamans and characters like that. There's usually a military involved and all that. But they still keep pretending as if this was like that, But I guess, I don't know. I guess we'll see with their report. He's got thousands of details.
Thousands of details, literally.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I could even hundreds of details would be exciting.
They got thousands.
I know. Forget about it.
Yeah. And no one's going to read it. If there's literally thousands of details, who's actually going to read it?
We should do a reading. We should do we should go on Twitch. Let's go on Twitch and just read it nonstop. People can donate to us.
Well, there's a precedent for that. There's America Reads the Mueller Report. Remember that? There was these staged productions where inside art galleries for 48 hours, somebody put on a live reading of the Mueller Report.
We should really do that.
Oh my God. There's going to be that again with January 6th for sure.
Where should we do it, Aaron?
Well, what's
the best venue would be?
I mean, shouldn't we do it on the grounds of the Capitol? Where it all went down?
So yeah. Will they give us a permit though?
If not, we'll riot. We'll invade the Capitol. Yeah, we'll invade the Capitol.
Wear the shaman hat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll invade the Capitol if they don't let us do our staged reading of the Capitol riot report. Yeah. So yeah, it's a plan.
This is the riot report.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have come to, I think, the end of the show.
I think the end of the show, yeah.
Yeah.
But guys, we know that you feel a sense of loss whenever we end the show. So we will be with you shortly at Colin. Isn't that great?
That's right. We're going to start calling at 1:30 Eastern time, which is
Oh my God. Clarice, thank you so much for your generosity. Look at that.
Thank you for the super chat, and thank you for all the likes. Have we hit our sufficient?
Oh yeah, how are we on likes?
Yeah.
Still at 888.
888. Let's get to 1,000, guys.
We usually do get to 1,000.
Let's get to 1,000. Let's get to 1,000.
I think part of the problem is this week I forgot to tell the CIA bots that we moved to 12:30.
All right, so they're not here.
So they were ready to like at 10 a.m., but now the CIA is all mixed up.
Right.
So we caught them off guard. You know,
Caught them
we
off
did a
guard,
classic, classic surprise warfare on the bots.
Typical playbook.
The classic useful idiots playbook. Yeah.
Classic useful idiots.
The UIPB.
Yeah. The UIPB. Yeah.
20
Are
more
we at
likes.
20 more, and then we'll be there.
We're really moving one like at a time here.
Hey, you know what? Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make that garden grow.
Oh, and by the way, we can say that this week on Useful Idiots, we're going to have more on the Iran protest.
Yes, we
We'll cover
are.
it this week. So
Yes, we are.
stay tuned for that. That will be good.
And we got 1K. Thank
All
you,
right.
UIPB.
I'm also
Yay.
excited that we didn't get pulled off the air when we joked that we were going to do that. Show up and do a little reading.
Oh, that's coming. So this broadcast might be censored, everybody.
Yeah, seriously, yeah.
Yeah. So if you witnessed it live, you were part of history.
Yeah, you were part of history. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much
You
for
guys
joining
on
us.
Colin.
Usefulidiots.substack.com for bonus content and to support us. And we'll see you next time.
Great. Bye.
Bye.